Next day, back to the hot sauce, 93 Saab 9000 Turbo. So it's not a beached whale anymore, but it doesn't run quite right. It idles high. The check engine light's flashing a code, and the throttle response seemed to be kind of wonky. But it's in the garage, so let's try to get this thing dialed in today and actually take it for a spin. I'm excited. So for now, I want to redo that experiment we did yesterday with the 4 channels on the PICO with the replacement engine computer, measuring the 2 wires on the crankshaft position sensor. That's the blue and the red channels, and then the green and yellow are the injector control and ignition trigger, respectively. So let's see how it fires up. Set up our scope and go from there. Alright, here we go again. Key on. Okay, fires right up. I got the throttle cable repositioned. And we'll shut her down. Very good. Alright, so here's a known good pattern. So the CKP has 2, 1, 1, 1. So I guess that's a kind of a weird pattern. So let's put in some cursors. So this is going to be 720 of the engine rotation, right? Cylinder 1 fires, cylinder 1 fires again. And what the heck is the CKP doing? There's a double pulse 1, double pulse 1, 1, 1, double pulse. Is there a repetitive pattern? Double pulse 1, 1, 1, double pulse 1, 1, double pulse 1, double pulse 1, 1, 1, double pulse 1. How does that make any sense? How does that make any sense whatsoever? Double pulse 1, 1, 1, double pulse 1, 1, double pulse 1. So it looks like that is 1 full engine revolution. That's pretty nuts. This must be a fancy CKP that I honestly don't understand. Why is the injector firing so many times per cycle? Car runs fine. I mean, it's smooth. Is this pattern repetitive? 2, 1, 1, 1, 1. Now there's 4 pulses between the sync notches. 1, 2, 3. How does that make any sense? So CKP is super weird. 2, 1, 3. There's no pattern there. Why is there a double pulse there? Double pulse, single pulse. So if anyone can explain that, that'd be amazing. But at least we have a pattern. And if this thing doesn't want to start at some point, when you hear it, doesn't it look like it's skipping something? That's just bizarre to me. So this crankshaft position sensor signal is completely blowing my mind. I don't see any pattern to it. Like, these are spaced really weird. And then over here, before I shut the engine off, seems to be more consistent with 1 pulse per crank revolution. If this is 720, this is going to be 360, so it's just pulse, pulse, pulse. Isn't that crazy? How did it change? Let's see, during the rev, it's still doing its little double pulse, 1, 1, 1, but it's not synced with the injector or ignition. How does the ignition even know when to fire based on this signal? Crazy stuff. I looked at the diagrams, and the only input to this thing is the CKP. There's no camshaft sensor. There's no other rotation, engine rotation sensor. We can unplug it, see what happens. I mean, that thing was replaced. Who knows if it was aftermarket or not. But how does the car run so well? It blows my mind. Alright, so just for kicks, I unplugged the CKP, and you can see there's been some massive wiring modification. I don't know why they did that. But that is, the CKP goes down towards the crank pulley. So, wiring colors match up. There's the plug for it. So, let's just see if it starts without the CKP. Let's see. Nope, definitely does not. And what is the check engine light flashing? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Same as yesterday. Alright, CKP is plugged back in. Just fires right up and runs beautifully. You can see the idle comes up to about 1400 and just stays there. So we have the TCS control, traction control light on. I don't see any buttons that say traction control. Okay, idle's going up and down a little bit. I press the throttle, it drops off a cliff. So it's kind of a and then it revs up. Okay. It is what it is, I guess. Alright, so did more digging online. What does this code 5 mean when the key's on and check engine light starts flashing? So, Trionic. To obtain a fault code reading, turn the ignition switch to the drive position without starting the engine. And then it just, there's 6-second wait period, lights on, then if there's a code, it'll start flashing. In about 6 seconds, check engine light will go out for about 2 seconds, and will begin flashing the first fault code. The code consists of a number of flashes, each having a duration of 0.4 seconds. The check engine light will go out for 2 seconds between each new series of flashing codes if there's more than one fault. After the last series of codes, the lamp will go out for 3 seconds, then lights up again for another 3 seconds, following which the flashing codes will be repeated. Flashing lamp codes will be repeated until the fault code memory is clear. To clear the fault memory, unplug the control module, connect it for at least 5 minutes. Okay, so we have this, and then 5 flashes, and then the 3 second. So what is code 5? There's only 9 possible codes. It's a very primitive system, I guess, at least for the flashing codes. We don't have this ISAT scanner. 5 says throttle position sensor. Okay, well I guess that kind of makes sense. The throttle response is funky, the idle is high, is there a problem with the throttle position sensor? Let's do a visual inspection on this thing. There's some custom wiring going on the throttle system. Okay, so it took me a little while to wrap my head around what is going on here. Why is the TPS custom wired? Then there's two more wires going down there to this thing that looks kind of new, and then there's a pipe going to here, almost like an air bypass valve. Then there's this zip tied 7-pin connector that's just hanging out. So finally clicked. This car came equipped with that traction control system, which actually featured an electronic throttle body. Does this look like an electronic throttle body to you guys? No. This looks like a regular throttle cable system with a TPS sensor and an idle air bypass valve. So was this converted at some point from the electronic throttle to a regular throttle body? It certainly looks that way, and the wires here, you know, some of them are labeled ECU 49, ECU 42, ECU 45. So let's take a look at the two wiring diagrams for the traction control vehicle versus the regular vehicle and see what the heck is going on. Does it have a different engine computer? Can you just convert from one system to another? I'm going to ask the owner. Like, he said that he doesn't know anything about this custom wiring. That's the way he bought the car, for 500 bucks actually. Put a clutch in it and apparently it drove okay. But I'm going to ask him, did it always idle high? Did it have this throttle stumble? He never mentioned anything about that. His only complaint was sometimes it didn't want to start. Could this have anything to do with starting? Yeah. I mean, if the idle bypass valve is not working appropriately, maybe on a cold start it wouldn't open and you would need some throttle to actually get it going. Yeah, let's do a little research and see what all these wires do, where they go. Alright, so it took a little while to trace these wires, and the picture is kind of coming together. So let's start with these non-OE wires. So first two go to the coolant temp sensor, right down there, black, and I marked this one with a little blue stripe. So the black one is tied to a ground, right there. It's crimped in. And then this one goes all the way, and I labeled all of them. So right here, pin 68 temperature sensor, and it turns to a yellow wire. Why would they do that? And there's also a yellow wire that's been cut right here, but that one has like a little blue stripe on it versus this one has a red stripe on it. But that's where that goes. Does that fit our pinouts? 68 engine coolant temperature sensor. Yes, it does. And on the wiring diagrams, what are the discrepancies? So here's a coolant temp sensor for the non-traction control model, just two wires. That one goes to ground, this one goes to pin, let's see here, 68, yes. On the traction control model, it's a fancier coolant temp sensor. One of the wires actually goes to 376 ETS, and that's the electronic throttle controller that lives under the driver's seat. That's what the OE information said. And the throttle body here, it's not even pictured. So keep that in mind. But that, you know, this coolant temp wire, the yellow one, goes to 68. So that matches between these two. So apparently they had to switch the coolant temp sensor. So I think the previous owner converted this car from traction control, electronic throttle control, to regular mechanical throttle control with the throttle cable. But is the engine computer different? The one that was flooded and smoked, the engine computer, I think, was for a non-traction control car. So that one was not original to the car. the computer that the owner brought me was for a traction control vehicle. So now all this bypass stuff might not work with that computer. So keep in mind that this computer is fussing about no throttle, no TPS signal, right? So let's keep going with all the bypass wires. Another 2 wires go to that newly installed idle air control valve. Okay, one of them is actually tied to a power feed that goes to the injectors. Is that right? So we have a 12 volt power, and then the control wire, I marked it with a red stripe right here. It goes to pin 49, IAC. So pin 49 is only used on the non-TCS car. There it is, 49. And this one, the power feed is tied to the injector power feed. So this is a ground side switched IAC control. Okay, so that makes sense. Now, the other 2 white wires here are for the throttle position sensor. So there's wire 1 and wire 3. So wire 1 I marked with a green stripe, and that goes all the way to right here, TPS 5 volt pin 42. Does that make sense? So right there in the non-TCS car, 5 volt yellow wire, TPS 5 volt reference. And the last wire, pin 3 on the TPS, that's the TPS signal, pin 45. So that goes here, TPS 45 signal. Okay, so the bypass stuff makes sense. It's to convert this car to a non-traction control system. Let's see why the traction control system computer would set a TPS code. So you can see here, TPS, pin 57, goes directly to this electronic throttle control module. Okay, so 57, throttle position, TCS cars only. And guess what? Pin 57 is empty on this engine computer. So 54, 55, 56, between the purple and the blue wires, you see an empty hole. That's why this computer is fussing about not having a TPS signal. So can we make this car happy with this traction control computer? I'm not so sure about this. Can we plumb in the TPS instead of from pin 42 into pin 57, and maybe it'll feel a little better? Because, you know, this computer probably can't even control the IAC. I mean, it does something because the idle does come up. And then the last piece of the puzzle here, I noticed that right here, this green and red wire is spliced into a yellow and red. So 1 wire coming in, 2 wires coming out. Which pin is that? Well, that's pin 59. Pin 59 on the traction control, well, actually it's used on both cars, but idling compensation, AC or ACC. So there must be another valve here to bump up the idle, and it's completely the opposite of TCS versus non-TCS. So it seems like maybe that is bumping up the idle to 1400 RPM for whatever reason if they're opposite. So let's say the computer thinks we're a TCS car, so it says off 12 volts, but for non-TCS, on is 12 volts. So I'm going to put the scope on, you know, the IAC control wire, the TPS wire, and that idle compensation wire, and we'll see what the car's doing. Can we modify it a little more to make it happy with this computer? Place your bets now. Alright, so let's gather some data with the oscilloscope. So I want 3 channels right now. Channel 1 is going to be on the TPS pin 45, which in this computer probably doesn't make a difference, but I want to see, is there a signal there? from 0 or whatever, half a volt to 4.5 volts. Channel 2 is going to be on this idle compensation wire, so that's an input to the engine computer, like if your AC is on. And for some reason they flipped it around, TCS versus not TCS. So I want to see if that's 0 or 12 volts under different conditions, and see what channel 3 here, the actual idle air control valve, what that's doing. Pull down circuit, so I'm guessing the lower the voltage, the higher the RPMs are going to be. So let's do that quick experiment, play around with this thing, and then I want to see if we can use this TPS signal, if it's there. Can we plumb it into, from pin 45, right here, to pin 57, which is on this TCS computer. That's empty right now, and it's not happy about that. But if we plumb it in, could potentially this card perform better and idle better. And we haven't taken out a test drive. I don't know what the throttle response is right now, but it's probably not great. Alright, so we got 3 channels on the screen. Blue is TPS signal, red is that idle compensation input, green is the IAC control. So key on. So IAC is doing something. TPS right now is almost at 12 volts. I don't think that's correct. Oh, actually, never mind. The blue trace is TPS. So TPS right now is going from half a volt, about 600 millivolts, to maximum of 4.4. Okay, so the TPS is working, but obviously this engine computer doesn't even see the signal. And the idle compensation right now is at 12. So let's key off, key on. So it's idling down to 1,000. Now it's ramping it up, ramping it up. Is there anything we can do to change the idle compensation PID to 0? Make this car idle down some more? I don't think so. I mean, the AC doesn't work at all. Okay. That's great. So now what I want to do is, this is just going to be a duty cycle control. Is this duty cycle changing? It is. So the more pulled down it is, the more the idle is open. And let's see right here, I think it did idle down. See, about 50% duty cycle. So we can just use the math channels. We want duty cycle of C. So we'll just create a channel. Advanced duty cycle of channel C. Next, black, okay. 0 to 100, finish. So we want to show that one. Okay. This is why PICO Scope 6 is awesome. There it is. So about 45% here. So see, it ramps up. So basically, the lower the duty cycle, the more this valve is going to open, I think. So it goes from here to here, kind of stabilizes, comes down. So at this duty cycle, about 45%, we're at 1400 RPM. Let me see here if we can pull this down with a test light, that red channel, and see if the idle drops. Just for kicks. See what happens. But this is a good first capture. Alright, so at least this TCS computer is controlling the idle air control valve. That's great. That's a good thing. We want to use that to our advantage. Now this idling compensation signal was 12 volts. So on a TCS car, that would mean off. On a non-TCS car, that would mean on. Okay? So again, this is originally a TCS car, so 12 volts would mean off. There's no extra load. The way that it was wired before, or on the non-TCS computer, it would have thought that it was on. So is this computer acting like a TCS or a non-TCS computer? I don't know. It is controlling the idle air control valve. What if we just snip that wire and make it 0? Would that help? We can try to pull it down with the test light, see if it lights the test light, or I just want to bring that voltage down somehow safely, and then see if the computer brings down the idle speed. Okay, so I'm trying to pull down this idle compensation wire. Test light lights dimly. Our fan comes on full speed. The AC fan. And our voltage came down to, yeah, about 5 volts. I'm tempted to just snip that wire. Alright, so first thing I want to modify here. So I put in a wire with a pin from a random collection into pin 57. That's the TPS input to this traction control computer, or rather the ECM that's for a TCS car. So you can see the pin there, it's close. I think it should fit. You know, I test fitted it on the computer pin. It slid on there. So as long as that goes on, and we can then jump this to the actual TPS signal right here, and we'll see if the check engine light, what happens to the check engine light if the IAC responds differently, whatever. I just want to try that right now before messing with that idle compensation input. Okay, so very simple. This is coming from 57 that I installed. I'm just jumping it through convenient jumper to pin 45, which is our TPS signal. So 0.5 volt to 4.5 volts. Let's see what the car thinks about this. Alright, here we go. So key on. Ooh. Is the check engine light going to start flashing? It's not flashing. Okay, key off. Let me make sure my ground is good. So whenever your scope signals don't make sense, make sure your scope ground is good. So now we're steady at 0. Key on. Okay. Let's see, TPS is normal. Check engine light goes out and is not flashing at the moment. Let's fire it up. Okay. I'm going to bring the idle up. It still has that stumble. So check engine is on and radiator level. So it did not change anything to the throttle response. Let's shut it off and key back on. Let's see if it starts flashing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Dang. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So nothing changed. A little long crank time there. Well, why is it saying radiator level? I have no idea. But anyways, nothing really changed. What if we pull that idle compensation pin down? Fan is on. Is our duty cycle different now? I think it dropped from 45 to 30. Now it's kind of cycling back and forth. Yeah, so it did drop down a little bit. Let's see if it went back up to 45. It did. You see that thing's making contact. So I'm going to count the flashes one more time. One, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, same TPS code. Okay. Alright, well let's see how this thing drives. Let's just take it for a shakedown run, see what happens. My wife, she's excited to go for a test drive in this. Actually, she's not, but I'll still make her go. Okay, so the turbo spools up a little bit. Let's get on the pavement here and see how it performs. Alright, let's do it. Nothing wrong with that boost. Clean out the brakes here. It feels happy. It's fine. You know, maybe the idle's not perfect, but you punch it, it goes. It may be like a split-second little throttle response, but it's fine. So I would actually return the car to the customer in this state. No problems. It's, you know, it's a beater Saab. His son's gonna learn to drive stick shift in it, and I don't see, it doesn't stall out, it starts right up. I don't know what the intermittent stalling problem was all about. Maybe that first computer was on its way out. I have no idea. So, you know, I'll keep it as long as he wants me to, but at this point I can tell him, take it, and if it doesn't start for you, I can take another look at it. But I think we're done with it. So, maybe we'll do a little bonus footage going up the mountain. So this thing, it's fun to drive. Saab wants to burn more miles. I love that blow-off valve. It definitely feels quicker than the Audi turbo wagon because it's probably lighter and it's got a little more torque, but this is awesome.